Hidden file and newest update shows CSGO 2 is coming. Hey guys, and welcome to my channel. Time is but a window. Now recently an update came out for CSGO. Now reading the update, you wouldn't think there's anything special about this update, but it seems they have put in a couple hidden features. One of those hidden features that they've added is Vulkan support, finally after all these years. Now for those of you guys wondering what Vulkan is the rendering engine for Source 2. It's the rendering engine used in Dota 2 and of course Half-Life Alyx. And there are many benefits to this engine, such as better frame rates, more consistent frame rates, and of course better graphics. And on top of all of that, it's compatible with Reflex ultra-low latency mode that Nvidia came out with, which is not to be confused with the ultra-low latency mode that you can find in the drivers. This Reflex low latency mode is found in most current FPS shooters with the exception of Counter-Strike. And it can lower the render latency immensely, especially in GPU-bound games. But I know what you're thinking. CSGO is a CPU-bound game! Yeah, well, so is Valorant, and Valorant's render latencies are about 3 times lower. We're talking about dropping from 21 milliseconds down to 7 milliseconds under heavy stress and load, which is incredibly important in a Twitch shooter when milliseconds matter. Now, Vulkan support has been hinted at for a very, very long time in CSGO, but until this point, everything we've gotten was from third parties. I mean, this is stemming back from all the way back in 2017, when at a presentation they talked about bringing CSGO to Source 2. But while that was only the first time they talked about it publicly, we do know that they were working on trying to get CSGO into Source 2 from far earlier than that. This is mainly because early screenshots were leaked from about 2013. So if they've been working on this since 2013, why hasn't CSGO been ported over to the Source 2 engine yet? So if they've been working on this since 2013, why hasn't CSGO been ported over to the Source 2 engine yet? That is a very, very good question. Obviously, CSGO is a game they want to keep around as long as possible, which is not an easy task because it's built on the same engine that Counter-Strike Source was built on, and Counter-Strike Source was released in 2003. Now, one of many excuses that was given is that the Source 2 team was too toxic for the CSGO team to work with. Another concern of theirs is that they're worried if they change the engine, it'll change the mechanics of the game. Going from the Source 1 engine to the Source 2 engine would make it so you have completely different physics. It would change the way that movement works, the way that jumping works, the way that grenade lineups work. It would even subtly change the way the recoil systems work. On top of that, it would even change the way your mouse movement feels, which in Counter-Strike Global Offensive feels very different than other first-person shooters because there is something called a frame buffer which buffers your input to the next available frame. In my opinion, this is absolutely horrible, and I felt it always made it harder to aim in Counter-Strike than it needed to be. Personally, this would have been a big enough selling point for me to want to change all of the mechanics just to suit this one issue. Still though, after this, I guess the question is, would porting it to the Source 2 engine really cause all of these issues? Well, they decided to test this out in a first-person shooter themselves. Not only did they use Half-Life Alyx to make a first-person shooter, because that one was in VR mode, they also decided to port over the Vulkan engine into Portal 2. So now you're probably asking, why did they only port the Vulkan engine? Well, this was mainly because the Source 2 engine actually uses 3 different systems. Most importantly, a new in-house physics engine called Rubicon. Now, while this has incredibly good physics, as you can tell from the gameplay of Half-Life Alyx, it will change the physics immensely in a game like Counter-Strike. And if it's going to change the physics in Counter-Strike, just imagine in a physics-based game like Portal 2, it would completely break the physics. So Valve was like, aha, all we gotta do is just port over the graphics engine and not port over all of Source 2. And in theory, that's a brilliant idea, except it's really not. The truth is, regardless of the modifications to the original Source engine, it is still a very old engine, and because of that, it still has a lot of limitations. Here you can see a side-by-side comparison of the Vulkan renderer in Portal 2 against the original renderer. It's consistently worse in every aspect. It requires more RAM, it requires more use of GPU, it has higher latencies, lower frame rates, it's not better in any way. Looking at it from the side of these benchmarks alone, it looks like it is a terrible idea and not worth the time commitment. But remember, Portal 2 is not a game that is currently being worked on. It is not a game that's going to have a massive overhaul to graphics in the near future. It was literally done as a testbed for CSGO. And the main thing is that it worked and it didn't change the gameplay. So what can we expect when Vulkan is fully implemented into CSGO? Well, right now, it really feels like Valve is treating CSGO as the last version of Counter-Strike. Like they never want to make a new version of Counter-Strike, they just want to enhance CSGO. which means that one thing it has to do is be able to support modern features. This is something the current graphic engine cannot do just because it's too old. So in my opinion, this is a big push to remain a top competitive shooter and get reflex low latency mode from Nvidia. This will not get rid of the frame buffer when it comes to mouse latency, but it will lower the entire latency, which means that you will get more real-time mouse input. So it will subtly change the way aiming feels in Counter-Strike. That being said, it won't change any of the physics, and it shouldn't change any of the movement mechanics, so the game will remain pretty much the same. Which means you don't have to worry about losing any of your skins, like as if they were making a new version of Counter-Strike. Meanwhile, since it is a much more recent graphics engine, we can actually expect better graphics. I mean, this is actually pretty complex to talk about, so I'm not entirely sure how to go about it, but here, I'll try to explain as best I can. Okay, so technically, even with the current graphics system that we're using, we can have better graphics than they currently are. But it's lacking a lot of newer techniques that make it look even better. There's subtle things that can make it look better, like PBR and SSS. Now, for those of you that don't know, Source does not support PBR, but the Source 2 engine does, as well as the Vulkan engine. I mean, it would be hard not to, since the Source 2 engine uses the Vulkan engine. Now, the cool thing about PBR is things can look incredibly good without taking a lot of resources, which makes it feel optimal for a game like Counter-Strike where you need high frame rates. So once Vulkan does get fully implemented into CSGO, I imagine they're going to redo all of the maps and all of the character models with PBR. After all, it's the current industry standard. But they don't technically need to stop there, and honestly, that gives them very limited area to work within, because as you guys know, everything's kind of moving over towards iRay. Now, the footage you see here is a Counter-Strike Global Offensive map ported over into Unreal 5. For the most part, it feels like it's the same textures, but as you can see, everything looks a little bit more photorealistic because of the iRay. Now, the problem with this, or path tracing, which looks even more realistic, is the fact that it's incredibly intensive on the GPU and usually requires a lot of input latency. Okay, I guess I should say a lot of GPU power, but input latency is more important to me, especially when it comes to a first-person shooter. And anyone that's played Cyberpunk 2077 should know what I'm talking about. Turning on iRay and turning it off, you can feel a massive amount of added input latency. So I'm not sure it's necessarily the best route to take, but PBR textures are definitely an upgrade, though I don't think it'll get as photorealistic as some people out there would hope. For example, this is about as realistic as PBR can get, and then here's how realistic iRay can get, which you can see working in real time with metahumans. Now, as far as I can tell as of right now, the only real downside, like I said, is the latency. However, Fortnite is going to be updating to the Unreal 5 engine, which will surely come with ray tracing, so we'll see how that affects the game. Obviously, it's a third-person shooter instead of a first-person shooter, but it's very similar in some regards. The good news is, after 10 years, Valve is finally making steps towards upgrading CSGO, so let's hope they do a good job at it. Now, if only they could add a decent anti-cheat and 128-tick servers for regular matchmaking. Anyways, guys, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Let me know your thoughts in the comments down below, and as always, have a great day.